Welcome to heCast, the official podcast of HeChangedIt. As always, my name is Mike Chisholm. As always, I am excited to be here. I say it like a broken record, but it's true. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to view or listen to this broadcast. We appreciate it so much, having conversations with amazing people about amazing things, all to do in the world of wellness, specifically men's wellness. And today is no different. We've got somebody who's a leader, and I'm very excited about the interview, the conversation we're going to have today, because it's somebody who's a local leader in politics, and they are. He's a guy that I really appreciate, and I really respect the way that he leads, because he's all about inclusion. And we're going to get into that with Loyal in a second here. But before that, listen, if you haven't subscribed to HeChangedIt yet, if you haven't downloaded the app, first and foremost, what the heck are you waiting for? Either store, the Google or the Apple store, please download it. Please sign up. It's still free. And for when it comes to heCast, we would really appreciate you subscribing. We'd also appreciate you sharing. If you like what you hear, that you would take you'd take these episodes and you'd share it with whoever you think might appreciate them. And we just want to grow this thing. So we're very grateful for those who are coming on board in the HeChangedIt community. Like I said, we have somebody today who is a leader, a local leader, an elected official, coming on in here, not because he wants to promote himself, but because he appreciates what HeChangedIt is doing. He appreciates the need for mental wellness and not just on a personal level, but on a community level. And I just really appreciate the heart that he brings to the way he leads. And Loyal Woodridge, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be part of heCast today.
Thank you for having me on the show today, Mike. And this is an amazing resource for mental health. And it's an honor and privilege to speak to you today on the ancestral unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people.
Okay, so now, first and foremost, I really appreciate Kelowna has always been a place where, and I shouldn't say always, I know for a long time it's been a place where, whether chamber meetings or community meetings, where we acknowledge at the beginning of those meetings the Indigenous heritage that we share. And that is really, really important. I just appreciate the fact that you lead with that.
It's extremely important as we walk this path of reconciliation with Indigenous people. I don't think we can acknowledge enough. And obviously this year is even more intense with the confirmation of over 215 bodies we saw into Kamloops. So I think all of us cisgendered white folk do need to step up and acknowledge the great lands that we that are unceded or not treated to Indigenous people of the lands.
Okay, I'm going to flat out say something here.
Sure.
You're polished in how you communicate. And I can see how some people would say, okay, that answer that he had, boy, what a put together answer that is. That's your heart.
That is my heart.
I know that's your heart.
Yes.
Like that is your heart coming out as you say that. You say that with full on respect and truth and pride as you say those words. Have you always been that guy, or has there been a journey that has taken you to be that person where you're so inclusive when it comes to things like that?
Well, I think that it evolves over time, right? And growing up gay in a small community like the Okanagan, that came with its own challenges, and you evolve over time. You go through heart-wrenching experiences like we'll discuss today. And that just shapes who we are. And I think sometimes being composed can be an armor. But you'll definitely probably see me today. That armor will drop down a little bit, and that just shapes who we are, and that brings a different lens and different perspective to how we represent ourselves and our communities.
I'm already excited about this conversation.
I'm stoked.
This is great. Okay, so we're going to jump around a little bit. I am going to ask you. You're in your first term.
Yes.
Being a city councilor.
Yes.
We're not, and my description was at the beginning was accurate, right? Business owner.
Yeah.
Always wanted to get involved more, roll up the sleeves and move into this thing. You've accepted positions like with the regional district as well. Like you're really into this.
Yes.
First question right off the get go. What is the thing that is the most, what was the biggest surprise beforehand, before you got elected, knowing you had these aspirations, to the actual job, what is the thing that you least expected was gonna that come to pass?
I can honestly say I spent about a year preparing for the election, and there have not really been any surprises. I knew it was going to be a lot of hard work. Probably the biggest challenge is finding balance within all of that. The reason why I stepped forward is that I wanted to fuse my entrepreneurial business mind with my social heart. Sometimes I think politics can get polarized on both sides, left and right. But I truly believe that to have a beneficial community and an inclusive community, you got to bring that into the center and fuse both together. Either side won't be happy all the time, of course, and that's just politics. But yeah, that's the surprises. Not really.
That's cool. I really appreciate hearing that. So it's very much what you expected it was going to be. And are you you're diving more into it? Like I see, and I'm saying that as a statement, but also a question you can confirm. You're diving more into this. Like you're really good at it and you're really passionate about it.
I'm extremely passionate about community, and my business up until this point gave me a pillar to get engaged with the community, whether that was the I Am Me campaign, standing up against bullying. That started as a pillar, and now I have the great opportunity to be a community leader, and that allows me to get involved in so many different aspects, whether it's the Okanagan Film Commission or the Regional District Table. It really helps us shape the direction that the community is growing, and it's changing, which is really beautiful to see in the region.
You know, you talk about community, and I've always been the guy where, to me, it's common sense that anybody who believes in whatever they want, as long as they're not hurting anybody, should be able to exist and have rights, privileges, respect, all of that stuff, acceptance,
Right.
And that would be it. However, we're getting to a time now where sometimes people's beliefs are so exuberant in a new way. The polarization is so stark that people are infringing on other people's beliefs and things like that. I mean, magnified. We look at COVID right now.
Right.
It's so easy to say, oh, I believe in community and all that. Now that you've kind of gotten into the muck a little bit with that, challenging to say the least.
It's challenging, and probably my biggest sadness lies in the fact that we stopped seeing one another. And we start to just see this single issue or our only perspective. And of course, I have my own perspectives and my own views. But I think sometimes we have to step back and look at that emotion that's coming out, whether it's anger, sadness, rage, and step back and go, or fear.
Yeah.
And where is that coming from? And when we can start to do that and see that we have differing perspectives and we can talk about that in a respectful way, we strengthen community. And I'll use the protests as an example. There's a lot of animosity on both sides.
Yeah.
And for me, that's an expression of how people are feeling. Yeah. Do I agree with certain locations that they're based in? Absolutely not. But when I step back and I look at a high level and I go, okay, why are we here right now? And a lot of it comes down to mental health, and people just don't know how to express it. They don't know how to process it, and they might not have the resources. So that's why I'm really honored to be here today, because we can dig deep into that aspect, which mental health for me is probably the baseline of what we need to address in general when it comes to community.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that too. For our viewers and listeners, Loyal was actually on one of the very first discovery sessions that HeChangedIt did. When he heard about it, we had a couple other politicians there and invited Loyal along. As soon as Loyal heard about it, he's like, I want in. I want to hear about this. Because mental health was already, and this is a few years ago, already in the forefront of your mind. When did that start?
So it all began, and actually today is the 5-year anniversary of my mom passing away unexpectedly. And that really took me on my own mental health journey, because what ignited me to run for council were the social challenges that we're having across our communities, across Canada, whether that's addictions or homelessness. And when we boil that down, we know the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
And that is community. And so when I suffered my own loss and I suffered some extreme mental health challenges, I went, whoa, I am a really privileged white cisgendered man that can really access any counseling services I need. And I don't want to live anymore. It's not that I want to die. It's that I don't want to feel this pain anymore. And so if I'm feeling that way and I come from relative privilege, how do our most vulnerable feel? or are single parents, disenfranchised. And that is really what inspired me to run for council. And it's inspired me on this mental health journey is to see people who they truly are, and support as best we can. Of course, nothing's ever going to be perfect and there's no magic wand to solve everything.
No.
But that's what spurred the journey.
Now we'll talk about mental health here we talk about HeChangedIt, how, to use the medical example, sometimes you break your leg. When you break your leg, you got to go to a fucking hospital. You gotta get that figured out, right? But sometimes you just stretch your leg a little bit, and you can rehab, you can do yoga, you can do all sorts of things. And that's what HeChangedIt. The goal of that is to have conversations like this, so it doesn't get to the point where we have to go to a medical professional or go to the, that next step. Obviously, when there's mental illness that needs to be addressed, that needs to be done. So you have this crisis in life that, every generation has been cursed with since the beginning of time.
Yes.
We lose our parents along the way, exceptions, of course, but that's the vast majority of people's experience. When mom passed, and 5 years ago today, and I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm grateful to hear you still bringing her up, and that shows her echoes right there. Thank you. Was there a time where it went past the line where you had to get some there was some mental illness stuff there? Was there diagnosis, or was it just this was a really tough time and you had to kind of dig deep, do some work, get to know yourself?
There was no mental illness. And it was a lot of work that I had to do within myself to cultivate my own level of support within myself, which again, growing up gay, I thought that I had, but until my sister and I had to make that decision to advocate for her to die with dignity, which at the age of 30 years old is a challenge when your mom's 56.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Talk
about adulting.
It's adulting. My sister is a registered nurse, and we have medical professionals that are saying, don't be a nurse today, be a daughter.
Oh my God.
So was there mental illness? No, but because it was so traumatic and so sudden, and thrust on a decision that was unexpected, it left me feeling like I don't really want to be here anymore. Maybe I don't want to live anymore. Again, do I want to die? No, I just don't want to feel this anymore. And that's where I really had to lean into mental health supports with a psychologist, really leaning into my partner, Ian, but also recognizing that mental health supports I like to equate to being vitamins. Absolutely. People think like, I need to take this medication or I have to see the psychiatrist. Well, that's like, it's vitamins. Like you take your vitamin C or vitamin D every day.
Yep. It's jogging twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Exercise, physical fitness. And so, yeah.
Were there any books you read, any techniques that you used? Was there anything, because you suddenly recognize if there's been 2 themes that have come up in this podcast more than any other themes, they are awareness and vulnerability.
Yeah.
You got to be aware, you got to know that it's happening. And many times we're on autopilot. We're living in black and white. You don't even realize we're living in black and white, that kind of dead inside sort of feeling that you're describing. Absolutely. And then suddenly there's a moment of awareness. Oh, shit. Okay. And then vulnerability, being able to actually accept. And this is where men many times have a lot of work to do, because even if we're aware of something, the tendency can be, let's take that and dig it down and push it down.
It's the armor. It's the armor.
It's the armor. And so you had this moment. I don't know how long it was after your mom passed or whatever. You had this moment where some awareness showed up and you decided to do something about it. Were there any books, techniques, things that, these things leave clues? Was there anything that you can give to our listeners?
Well, Brene Brown's always been an author that I love.
Oh my God, I love her. She's on my hit list, on my dream list. I
amazing. And talk about amazing podcasts too.
Oh God, yeah, for sure.
But I will say is that we can often self-help ourselves to death. And I've always had that pattern since I was 18 years old, and my dad and I have had challenges in our relationship. So I've always, read tons of nonfiction and self-help books. And sometimes you gotta let those uncomfortable emotions sit there.
You gotta lean into them.
And lean into them. So I actually ended up going away to a retreat about 7 months after my mom passed away. And one of the therapists there said, "What's the difference between grief and depression?"
Oh, wow.
And we sat around the room and people said, well, maybe grief is just more intense because it happens out of the blue, and depression is something that you're diagnosed with and it goes on and on and on. Okay, well, what's the difference between melancholy and depression?
Yeah.
well, maybe melancholy is just not as sad. And they explained that, in hundreds of years ago with artists, with really artistic people, they would go through states of melancholy or grief, and that was part of their creative process. And community would gather around them. They'd bring them food to their house. They would nurture them, give them space. But they would create their most authentic and amazing art when they started to emerge out of that. And then, intergenerational trauma has shown us that let's just push that down. Let's just push that down and not dig deep into it. And then that created disconnection in community. So when you can allow yourself to sit in those feelings, whether it's anger, rage, whatever it is, they aren't bad emotions. They're just they're just emotions.
Yes.
And we're taught that, rage or anger or fear are bad.
Yes.
Happiness, joy, are good and positive.
Sure.
And we should always aim for good and positive.
Sure.
Well, that's bullshit.
Yep.
That's absolute bullshit.
Yep.
And we need to experience all of it. And that's how we actually move through some of our mental health challenges.
You don't know joy if you don't know the opposite. Even for, hopefully the majority is joy, but joy does not exist if you don't at least know the other end of the scale.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, I love how you described that. What a great question. The difference between depression and grief, and pondering those things and organizing those things and getting some clarity. And clarity like that, I mean, even again, sometimes just awareness, it literally takes the weight right off the shoulders suddenly.
Totally.
Did you have a moment when was it during that retreat where you had a moment where you went in there feeling one way, you came out feeling lighter?
I did feel lighter when I left, but again, it's a journey that ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And I would sit on my psychologist's couch and I'd be like, I just want this to end. Just like, give me a technique, give me a book, like a process. And she's like, it just has to sit there.
Yeah.
And one day it'll soften and some days it'll be more intense and other days it won't. And some days you'll be driving and you'll be crying. But when you can just let it be there and fall apart if you need to, it allows it to move through you. When we hold on so tight, which we're so used to doing, especially in public roles, you don't actually allow it to come through. And then that manifests in different physiological issues, whether that's cancer, et cetera. So for me, it was just allowing it to be there, being super uncomfortable with it, and having these courageous conversations actually really helped me move through it. And probably the biggest turning point for me was actually speaking publicly in front of a group about losing my mom, which is about a year after.
Yeah.
And by speaking in that group and allowing myself to basically almost stand there naked.
Yeah.
And
emotionally, you certainly are.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Expressing the vulnerability, that allowed more healing. So from my perspective, it was using that intense hurt and that intense loss to share that with others, to say, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah.
And we can have these courageous conversations. And it doesn't make you less of a man. It doesn't make you less of a person. It just makes you human. And again, that's where we can begin to see each other more.
One of the things, we've got big aspirations here. One of the things that Candace and her team have targeted is a phrase in the culture that literally they want to take back for the entire world. We want to take back a phrase and reframe what it actually means. And you are giving a living, perfect example of this when talking about this story that happened to you. We want to take the phrase "man up" back. Awesome. And for the listeners, I mean, they've heard me talk about this like a freaking broken record. But you talk about that. The idea of the old manning up is what we've been describing. Push it down. Oh, don't cry. Don't blah 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 blah. Man up. Man up, man up. But what manning up truly is being able to sit in it.
Yeah.
Having that vulnerability, having that awareness, and being able to just know that it's okay to sit in it, that it's okay to do these things, and actually to be proactive by taking responsibility and saying, okay, I'm going to let the process take care of itself. I'm going to understand. I'm going to be vulnerable. That's manning up.
Absolutely.
And taking that, and we're going to take this phrase and we're going to turn it back into that and use it as a power phrase in a massive positive way. That's exactly what you did. And you just talked about that. Like, that's what manning up really, really is.
Absolutely. And I think going back to your original comments about when we first sat around the table with HeChangedIt, and a lot of the preliminary app had like sports and really manly.
Oh, I remember.
Things.
You said, okay, hold on. Sound a little bro here. I remember you saying that.
Exactly.
And it was because we were just brainstorming, and then you're like, it sounds a little bro here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I do remember that. That was a really key moment in those discovery meetings when you said that.
And that's the evolution of this great brand that I think is going to be so supportive for people, with regardless of how you identify.
Yeah.
So it's been a really awesome evolution to see if he changed it.
Well, God, man, genetically, and I mean, I'm not going to get into a pissing contest with people about who talk about genetically versus socially and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, we know the numbers when it comes to suicide, when it comes
Absolutely.
to ticking time bombs.
Yeah.
And men are the top of that list.
Yeah.
And we have to do something to release the pressure out of the balloon.
Yes.
And to help things. And that, talk about that. I mean, imagine if we could take 20 or 30% of of the men in our community and teach them that it's okay to lean into things like that. Imagine how that it's going to affect the rest of the community, the ripples of the families and the friends and all of these things, relationships that have bosses, mentors, mentees, whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it will change the world, and change is so needed. I just appreciate how you're willing to discuss this, and it's interesting that now you are in a place of where the spotlight is firmly on you. Now, before I move into questions about how you've dealt with COVID and all this sort of stuff from a leadership perspective, did your mom know about your political aspirations?
Not overly. She knew about my community aspirations. Obviously, she was deeply involved in she was deeply involved in the business. We always used that as a vehicle to support the most underrepresented voices. And council had always been in the back of my mind. But honestly, I always told myself, oh, you need to be older. You need to have a designation, maybe later on. But in losing her,
a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
Why? Me? No, not me. I can't. I'm not. Never me.
I haven't gone to post-secondary other than trade school. But in losing her, I realized, like, shit, if I don't do this now and I die when I'm 56, there's no other chance to do this. So you don't have a second shot. You have to make those decisions. And I was very fortunate that the electorate gave me this grace in 2018. And
first time running.
First time running. Yeah.
Rare in this community.
It's rare. Absolutely. And again, I spent a year researching and doing my due diligence and attending every council meeting for that year. And then I was very fortunate to work with a great team that was very supportive, that helped me with some of our biggest community issues, which are still not over. But very grateful for the last 3 years, and hoping to seek re-election next year as well.
And that's happening. You know that you're that 99% whatever, barring, anything major happening. I'm not going to hold you to it, but the plan is that you're going to run.
Things can change within a year.
Sure.
There's this kind of odd pulse that politicians don't share what their plans are in the next election. I will be seeking re-election on council. If Kelowna will have me, I've given 150% of what I can. I've also taken a step back from my business. I sold that June 1st.
Yeah.
So that I can dedicate more time to my community. And I've loved it so far. And probably my biggest joy is seeing that we've housed 441 people in the last 3 years, which has been the largest investment into housing in Kelowna that we've seen in recent history. So there's always more work to do, but I'm very blessed by what's been accomplished so far.
Well, let's talk about 3 years. So 3 years is a good marking post, because half of that time has been COVID. We will get to that. But the first half of that, the first 18 months, they're pretty divided too. You had a lot of shit come up from a community standpoint in our local community, and it's happening across North America right now, where homelessness, and thank God that it's happening in so many communities where the focus is now shifting to it in ways that we've never seen in our lifetimes. There's now, obviously the work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, our friends down in the States, man, there's some crippling examples of homelessness getting out of control. And on a micro level compared to them, within your first few months,
right,
that suddenly became a massive, we're going to not just talk about this, we're going to do something about this issue. Divided community, certain people, I got to be careful not to judge. I don't want to judge, but certain people so far on one side of it saying almost like, oh, those people, they got themselves into their mess. We're not going to give any, all the way to we need to give these people everything
Yeah.
to fix their issue. And here you are in the middle, business owner / first time counselor, and you're seeing real polarized people. Was there any shock to that, or did you know that you were coming into that?
So I'll just step back a little bit. And I grew up in an RCMP household. My dad was a RCMP member. My mom was a dispatcher. So I grew up in a household of enforcement. So that's what I saw my whole life. And to be transparent, from a business perspective, I thought, we're in Canada. We have free healthcare.
Yeah.
We've got services. If people want to get better, they can. And the situation just kept getting worse and kept getting worse and kept getting worse. And we keep hiring more police and you keep throwing people in jail, and it's not working. So then I started to step back and look at, how did we get here? And then, we go back to the 80s when psychiatric care was basically disassembled and stopped.
Yep.
And it was the perspective that, caring for people in their family unit in their home is the best way, which I agree.
Sure. But they have to have tools for that.
They've got to have those
for
supports and they have to be wrapped with that. And the family has to be prepared for that. So here we were decommissioning psychiatric care without a plan. And so then enter in opioids, enter in addiction, rising housing costs, socioeconomic divide, all of this just couples. And then this is where we are now. Mm-hmm. So I understand the fear. I understand the frustration. I grew up in it.
Yeah.
But what I simply know is that it didn't work. Right. The war on drugs has not worked. Yeah. And we have to address this in a different way. So are they difficult decisions? Absolutely. I lean into data. I lean into professionals that show us how we can move through this.
Yeah.
Of course, the challenge at a local government level is that we're children of the province.
Yeah.
So we deliver all the sexy things like sewer and landfill and all those great things that we take for granted. But when it comes to funding housing or funding health, that all comes down through the province. So we act as advocates and conveners, but I definitely saw it as probably the shoe-in where we could start to see some change.
Yep.
And the previous council to this term really started that journey with the Journey Home strategy, where they spent about 1.5 years speaking to people with lived experience, the faith community, enforcement, to really come up with a plan about homelessness.
Trying to get everybody involved to the table.
Exactly,
let's find solutions.
Exactly. And it's not going to be perfect.
No.
It's going to take time. And again, what I remind people is this has been decades of neglect.
Yes.
And so unwinding that in 3 or 4 years is simply not
it's impossible.
Realistic.
Yeah.
But again, we can see the challenges that we still continue to see on our streets. We can see the crime, but we can also see the 441 people that we have housed. Yeah. And I'm very proud to say that those people have housing now.
Is it too early to talk about success stories from the people who started getting the housing, getting the treatment that they needed, now are moving into, and I hate even using this term, it sounds so judgmental, but contributing back to a place of contributing rather than a place of hurt, and being, somebody who's in need of attention, physically, mentally, whatever it might be, but they're in need. Have you seen any of these people that have been housed that have kind of moved into another place, mentoring others, that kind of a thing? Right.
And I think we have to be really careful about what contributing means.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because a lot of people think that means working 9 to 5, 40 hours a week.
Yep.
As a lawyer. Has that happened? Have I seen that? Sure. Yeah. I've seen people that were unhoused that have, ended up going back to school and now are public speakers and highly educated. But I think it's really important to know that a lot of these people are really hurt and really sick.
Yes.
And one of the great successes that I've seen are folks that were, sleeping on Leanna Avenue in a tent city type situation.
Yep.
That are sitting out in the cold in the winter that then get housed and then take advantage of the people employment program, which is the people experiencing homelessness that have paid opportunities. So they end up having roles like cleaning washrooms, handing out water at marathons when those can happen.
Yeah.
Because for some folks, that's going to be 15 or 20 hours a week and having a really flexible work schedule while they live in their supportive housing. And that can be a contribution in itself. And that lived experience and mentorship is, I think, as equally as important. So I think we as privileged people need to be cautious around what contributing means.
Yes.
Because there's there's folks that are forever going to need our support, and that's just part of our community.
See, and this is one of the things that I love about you. I had trouble articulating, and I threw the word contributing in there because of my background, and I know that I was using that word with a sensitive feel to it, but very easily that word could be misconstrued for exactly what you just said. This is one of the reasons why I love your leadership so much, is because you're not afraid to dialogue with people. That being said, I get you in the studio here and we can go one-on-one long form and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
You're not given that luxury to people by people very much. You get maybe a chance for a soundbite after some really aggressive listening on your part. You're listening to some aggression coming at you, or some passion. And I'm using those words to be as classy as possible.
Yeah.
You've also seen some really ugly things.
Yeah.
And you're given the chance not to long form something. How tough is that? Like, and then you talk about, I want to move to COVID too. You talk about how on a local level, you guys are literally sometimes just the news bearers of things where your hands are completely tied.
Right.
Yet people look at you as talk about shooting the messenger. I mean, God, you guys get shot so much and don't given a chance to communicate. How frustrating is that to you?
Well,
is it grating on you? Is it wearing you down over these 3 years?
Obviously frustrating, because I don't think anybody goes into public life without a love for their community, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal. And the other thing is that we see a lot of information 360. So there's things that we are seeing for, say, 6 to 12 months, COVID aside,
sure,
of a process like Journey Home. I'll use as an example.
Yeah, the homeless is a really good example of that.
And you're seeing it every single week, and you're having briefings from professionals. And so it's not something that you can explain in a 30-second interview on the radio or a 90-second interview on TV. All you can do is kind of explain your decision, but it's usually backed up by numerous pieces of information to lead you to that point. So that goes back to the data-driven decision making.
Yeah.
And again, probably in public life, the biggest challenge is making those decisions without explaining it to the public in advance, because you're being presented at a council meeting about a supportive housing project that you're literally forming character on, not who lives there. So that's where there's a bit of a divide. Personally, I like to live authentically and with integrity. So even through the last election, there was one site for supportive housing where the residents were making it an election issue. And at the end of the day, for me, if I make a decision that makes someone not vote for me, but was in the best interest of our community as a whole, then that's a bullet I have to take. And if that means not being reelected next time, that is the democratic process. And that's the way the cookie crumbles.
I'm going to say this with as much respect as possible, because I know you're going to be authentic in how you not just respond to it, but I know you know that I'm not coming from a negative place in asking this. I've seen politicians in my lifetime, I'm sure you have as well, where they go in one way, and then after, say, especially 4 or 5 times in the grinding machine, they are different people. Obviously, we're growing all the time, and we're going to be different people no matter what happens, because we're growing and evolving, things like that. But I've seen it where it's worn out people and it's broken people. Has this process so far in this 3 years changed you? And can you see that you have to have certain safeguards up? Otherwise, whether it be temptations of something, whether it be wanting to react a certain way, even your attitude of inclusion and community, and giving that extra measure of grace to people who really loudly disagree with what you're saying, and you still have empathy for people. Has any of that stuff changed or been tested?
Absolutely tested.
Yeah.
And I love the word grace. And I think oftentimes we use that word to extending it to others. And my biggest learning has been extending it to myself.
You giving yourself some grace.
Exactly. And that might mean deleting all of my social media apps off my phone for a week or a month. After one supportive housing public hearing, I deleted it off of the social media off my phone for a month.
Yeah.
Socially, people would say, well, you're a politician, you need to update people. I'm like, you know what? I need to take that month away from the sewer of the internet being social media and just recharge myself and refocus. Again, I think when you go into public service for the right reasons of community and hold that true and don't make political voting decisions, you evolve into a better person. When this becomes a career and you just want to hold on to that position as long as you can, it no longer becomes about service and it becomes about being a job.
Right.
And I've always said, when that happens to me, it's like the salon. That is my time to step back. There was a mentor that said to me, when you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. And that always stuck with me because I always said to myself, in the hair industry, if I'm not excited to go to a class and learn something or get an update seasonally, I know that's time for me to step back. And it's not that I hate the industry or I can't learn more. It just means that I've got the t-shirt. It's time to move on. So I think that in leadership, that rings true as well. Yeah. And again, that grace that we can give ourselves and that space we can give ourselves is ultimately the most important piece so that we can stay centered in ourselves.
That makes sense. When you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. I love that.
It's a bit graphic, but
no, but it's good though. Like, and these analogies and metaphors that we use to describe the human experience and where we're life and the growing experience. And when we're stuck, this is really, really important to be able to decide this stuff. I mean, it must have been sort of a bittersweet or a tough decision to close down your business. But you're still entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, you talk about doing this as a career job or whatever. No, you still got your gears turning. Like, I know you're working on some stuff on the side as well. You've still got your fire stoked to do things like this.
And it is always bittersweet to exit a business. And I didn't end up closing it. I was very fortunate and was able to sell my business. Nice. And again, I think entrepreneurial spirit is always within us. So you cultivate experiences and you kind of birth, if you will, new innovations. And so I'm definitely working on something right now to fuse community and business together again into something that's going to benefit the community, but also in a really natural way, and use my background in the beauty industry to create something cool. So that'll be coming next year.
Oh, that's a neat little tease. Okay. Yeah. Well, that being said, next year when it's time to launch, you'll come back. We can talk about it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I want to get into COVID. I want to talk about COVID here.
Sure. Yeah.
You are
you're a topic of the last 18 months.
Well, you're a leader within COVID. I mean, and you have seen and heard so many things where it starts one way and then evolves into something else and then evolves into something else. And there is no roadmap for shit like this, right?
Absolutely not. And there's no policy book and there's no guide to get it done. And so oftentimes when I hear people that are frustrated again on either side of the fence, why are things being done this way? Why is this so last minute? Why? There's no rule book. We haven't experienced this in 100 years. Yeah. And then throw in technology and throw in social media into that mix. And that complicates things even more.
Yeah. Your hands are tied because much of the policy that is getting written for you right now is not, you're not an author.
Right.
It's being passed down. This policy that's being written on the fly by folks above your head. And just get thrown down there, and you're expected to enforce and make that happen. That being said, there are also areas where you have to make decisions on a local level as well, and some of these uncharted waters.
Yes.
How important is team during this process?
And I think that's a really great point that you bring up, is that you can really lean into the wisdom of the 9, is what we often say, which is, there's 9 elected officials around the table, the mayor and 8 councillors. And that is probably my biggest comfort, because when you're an entrepreneur and you're on your own, the buck stops with you.
Yep.
With council, you have a group around the table and you can discuss things. Again, like you already mentioned, a lot of the decisions are being handed down to us, and we're receiving that information for the first time as everybody else in the community.
Yeah.
So there's often this perspective that, there's this backroom banter about how we control people. And,
yeah. Oh yeah.
And
guys and gals around the table with cigars and
exactly
to making decisions for people.
When at the end of the day, we want to keep our community safe, and this information is evolving over time, and data is evolving almost daily. So we do have to trust science from my perspective. We do have to lean into the wisdom of the 9. But again, I think at the heart of it all is keeping the community safe and making decisions based around fact and data.
Yeah. I think people assume sometimes whether it's the mayor or one of you have to come up in front of the cameras or in front of the reporter and basically state what's going on.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes assume that you're not frustrated too.
Right.
You're probably frustrated more than some of the even most impassioned, whatever side of whatever issue they're on. You probably have just as much frustration, if not more, than those people, because you like you said, you get a bit of a bird's eye view where there's probably extra layers of frustration there, but you don't show that. I'm going to ask you this straight up. You're a human being. You get frustrated too, right, Loyal?
I was just going to say, sometimes we can forget that the other people on the side of the camera are human beings too, living in their reality with their families that are probably living next door to you. And so people often say to me, well, I'm a taxpayer. I'm like, yeah, awesome. So am I.
Yeah.
And, we both care about our community and we both want to keep it safe.
Or have fears for God's sakes. I mean, you're a human being. You're going to have fears, but you have to compartmentalize that and be part of something bigger.
Yeah.
That's got to be difficult.
It's really difficult. And probably my biggest, do I want to say fear? I will say fear is that with this polarization that we're seeing on name the subject these days, that it disincentivizes people to run for office and to step up into leadership because you do stand there naked in front of the public, basically. Yeah. And do your best. But when you're having egg thrown at you, or rocks, as we've seen with the prime minister, I do have some trepidation that might disincentivize people for running in the future.
Well, and I will say this straight up. I was going to finish with this, but I'm not going to now. I'm going to say this because it came up organically. I appreciate so much when I see a leader like yourself who really cares from the heart for this thing, and despite some of that shit, that you care so deeply and you still will continue to try and you continue to get up out of the dirt when people are trying to throw you in the dirt. Again, still having these fears, still having these frustrations, all of these things. Thank you for doing this. I'm grateful for people that there are people like you in this world. So thank you very much. The gratitude for people who actually do give a damn, aren't just trying to promote their own agenda, kind of a thing. They do care about community. Those are the people who I want to be making the decisions that I'm too busy living my life to go and make. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And I can't say it enough that it's an honor and a privilege, really. Like I said, this isn't a career for me. This is only a period of time. So I do see it as a huge honor. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to have that voice around the table and to represent a different perspective. Because again, I think our communities are stronger when we can bring that to the table.
I couldn't agree more. We talk about, I love the idea of, I don't want to say abolishing career politicians. That's way harsh than I want to go. But the idea that politicians should also be citizens first.
Absolutely.
And that should be a thing rather than entrenching behind the office. But the office is a representative of all of that, because that's really in the spirit, I believe, of why this process was created.
Correct.
That being said, are there aspirations from a political standpoint where you would have to be full time? Like, do you look at member of parliament, or do you look at being an MLA or something else, another position within leadership of a government? Is that anything appeal to you when it comes to that?
Well, I do love leadership.
Yeah.
And I don't know what level. But what I would say is that I'm most passionate about leadership that affects our residents on the ground. And there's macro politics in terms of global trade and really important subjects. My heart doesn't lie there as much because I like to see how it affects our residents and our people. Yeah. So again, like I said, municipal government delivers a lot of really sexy services. But you probably would notice if those municipal services weren't around more so
be the first thing
than the federal policies.
Absolutely.
So if your garbage didn't get picked up or your toilet didn't flush, those are the services that affect people on a daily basis. So I sit on a really, really sexy committee, the biosolids committee, where we literally decide how to manage toilet waste.
Yeah.
But again, when I was first assigned to that committee, I thought, oh, great, this is lovely. But it is a really important subject that's actually super interesting. So in terms of higher levels of government, of course, I'm always interested.
Yeah.
if that opportunity arose. But the litmus test for me, I guess, would be how does that affect our residents, and how can I continue to be engaged at a community level?
I appreciate your candor so much. In finishing this, I guess I want to ask if you have any messages, words of wisdom, advice, points of view that you would like to kind of get out there for people who might be polarized on any issue, COVID, anything like that, when it comes to leading this. As we moved, I told you time is slippery. It goes by real fast.
Totally.
So is there anything that you want to throw out there for people right now? Any insights that you want to give us, Loyal?
There's probably two. And one would be to step back and give yourself grace to be able to see your emotions, to breathe into it and realize where that's coming from. And if you need to seek help, seek that help. But when you can step back and see that transparently in yourself, the second thing means that you'll see other people as people. Yeah. So those two really marry together for me, is that name the subject that's polarized. If we can step back and see people as people, and that a lot of folks are hurt or they're in fear, and if we can come to them with a place of understanding and not aggression or arrogance, then we will be better overall as people. So again, we all have our own perspectives, but we have to see each other for who we are.
I mean, and the physical example of that is just taking a step back and having 3 deep breaths sometimes.
Absolutely.
That's all it takes sometimes. Sometimes it is a little more complex, and you got to take a night to sleep on it, or a couple nights before you. But pausing to reflect and be aware, I mean, that's never bad advice.
Absolutely. And again, I can't stress professional supports as well.
Sure.
Again, there was a hockey player that was in mental health crisis last year that was suicidal, and we ended up connecting him with some services. And then I met up with him a few months later, and he said, well, I'm just so embarrassed to see you in person because I'm supposed to be strong. I'm a hockey player, but I'm bipolar. And I went off my meds. And I'm like, that's okay. If you're in a car crash, an ambulance comes. If you're in mental health crisis, we need to get you the right supports. So I think I can't stress enough that having the right supports is not a vulnerability. It's an asset. And again, as we see each other as people, we'll be better as a community and better as a world.
Loyal, in closing, you didn't ask to come on here to promote yourself, your brand, your persona within politics. You are excited about what HeChangedIt is doing.
Absolutely.
And there's a commonality here, and we wanted you on here.
Thank you.
Because of this connection. How important do you think HeChangedIt is going to be as it grows? The potential that's there. How important do you think this sucker is?
Again, like I've already said, I think we have to dig deep when it comes to mental health across the board. And I'm really grateful to see you guys step forward and address this from a men's perspective. And I can't wait to see this create even more traction over coming times. And I think it's even more important now as we're even more addicted to our phones and needing more mental health support. So thank you for all the great assets you're bringing forward.
Man, thank you for saying those words. Thank you for being you. And thank you for taking time out of your day to be part of HeCast today. When you launch your product, make sure we stay in contact. And I know you and Candy you'll always stay in contact and whatnot, but where our paths can cross, let's make that happen.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
They go by that quickly. That's another one. Another episode of HeCast is in the can. Again, one more time. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please share us out. Let's get the word. Let's make this thing happen. Let's grow it as fast as we possibly can. And let's help as many people as we possibly can. My name is Mike Chisholm. I am the host of HeCast, the official podcast of HeChangedIt. Go change something.